Previously on AJG, we discussed the baby issues like sex, violence, and mortal terror. Today we stop pussyfooting around and tackle the big one. How many buttons do you see in this image? More specifically, how many single inputs are possible? Take this moment to pause and post your answer in the comments. I mean it. Take this for realsies. Answer in 3, 2. Haha! I have deceived you! Your answer will largely depend on the games you play, and I will now use it to make brass assumptions about your taste and character. Scroll through the responses and shame any dumb fucks who think there's 28 or lower. Anyone who made such an error will have this scarlet number haunt them for the rest of their days, marking them as a filthy, stupid, casual dilettante who probably plays video games for fun. These folks failed to account for some of the GameCube controller's fun gimmicks, like the pressure-sensitive half-presses on the triggers, and the stick's ability to tilt. With that said, even if you answered 46, you're still lacking in creativity. The process of pressing a singular button is technically 3 separate inputs. You've got the positive edge where the button is pushed in, the duration it remains held, and the negative edge when it comes back up. That'll multiply our total all the way up to 138 unique inputs. But the minimum value I will accept for full credit is 139. Any link main will talk your ear off about the hidden technique known as the no input input. If you gave up early because you saw Ryu in the thumbnail and didn't want to count every potential Shuryu, Fireball, 360, or pretzel motion, I want you to know that you are a fool and a coward. I said single inputs, and those are all strings of separate inputs. The only real reason to give up is because you don't want to count all the button combinations, like smashes up Bs or shield grabs. I mean, I've never seen a half R press combined with the start button do anything before, so you might think I'm being silly considering it. But that kind of brings us to my reason for crunching all this seemingly meaningless data. Most games will obviously fall short of using all 139 of those inputs, but most games will also need more than just those initial 28 to get fully fleshed out. When special inputs become a necessity, which best suit what situations? If controls are best when the user doesn't need to think about them, how can gameplay get complex without compromising that? And how can a control scheme balance intuitivity, functionality, and exponential depth? Let's start our analysis with what's probably the most initially intuitive and simple input: holds and the negative edge. It's easily the ideal out of the modifiers we'll be breaking into today. A newer player might not even notice that they're using it to control ups and downs in just about any platform-focused game, just because they're so intrinsically understood and simply performed as soon as the player perceives that there is a button to be pushed. If you want to complete an action that a press began, it instantly makes sense that a release will do so. There are 2 fairly significant weaknesses here though. Firstly, you lose the held button. You really need an ascended mind in order to hold on to Zero's charge shot in Marvel. You have your standard light, medium, and heavy attacks, but if you hold any of them, you begin to charge up a super strong projectile. This means to start, you have to throw out an attack, which typically means you do it at the beginning of a combo or at the end. But if you want to use the third of your moveset hidden behind that now held button, you need to throw out something else to maintain charge. For even your most babyest of combos, the result is something along the lines of hold light, hold medium, release light, hold heavy, release medium, hold special for the launcher, making a point not to release heavy, release special, and then do it all again for the air combo. That's only 4 moves. I imagine that's easier on stick, but still, just holy shit. As you can probably tell, this brings up our second issue, where in addition to the button, you're also losing a finger. The human body is pretty awesome. We can do a lot with just 2 hands, but we're already using most of our fingers holding onto the pad, so we have precious little to spare. Dark Souls has a lot of running through memorized areas, but that requires 1 finger holding B, another on the main stick, and another on the camera. That basically leaves you with your left pointer for what's typically a shield, and maybe your right ring finger for offense if you're willing to risk dropping the controller. The best technique I've been able to find is to hold run with the first segment of my pointer, which gives me access to the 2-handed toggle even if it's an unusual position. Once you ask me to perform the same for the D-pad, I start to lose performance, and begin to focus on the controller over the magical fantasy world. So I think it's fair to say that though holds and negative edge allow for it, they start to fall apart if you really need the user to multitask. The pinnacle is Nero from DMCV. You've got to charge up your explosive shot and break gauge super, but the downside is that you not only lose your regular shot and devil arm, but also the ability to play the game comfortably until you throw out your big moves. Maybe what I'm experiencing is Nero's anxiety to show off his flashy stuff, but I imagine everyone would feel just as tempted to throw it out if it charged up on its own. Well, I suppose it's more initially taxing and not quite as intuitive. Hitting multiple buttons simultaneously is a strong second compared to having to hold down something until you need it. Typically, you have one button that puts you in a modified stance, and then the next determines the action. So I guess they don't have to be completely synced up. But the general weakness of this type of control system is how it's unintuitive and how it relies on memorization. There is an element to all inputs where you kinda have to know what they do before you press the button, but it's especially bad here. In Arkham City, your 4 main combo attacks come out when you press 2 adjacent phase buttons, but there's no way of telling which input does what. Stun plus counter gets you an instant kill, and stun plus dodge triggers a multi, but there's no greater meaning behind that combination of buttons. It helps for the modification button to make some sort of contextual sense, like in Smash, where the direction of your stick matches your move's general direction, though you run into some troubles there too. For example, sprinting into a neutral, fastfall up airs, throwing out a back air whilst moving forwards, or basically moving and attacking in any other direction is always awkward at best. Even with the help of tilts on the C-stick, rising neutral airs end up cannibalized by the short hop shortcut, just because of the way everything got put together. Now, if you Ryu people are still salty from before, here's the part where you get your time in the sun. I guess motion inputs are somewhat divisive between people who play fighting games and people who suck. On one hand, they allow for borderline infinite inputs even before combining them with the stuff we've already covered. I'm not going to bust out the calculator again, but if you simplify a stick to just 8 inputs and account for any combination of 3, then that's 58 buttons per button. Most of those are going to be cancer to execute, but that leads to basically infinite depth. The downside being that even the most satisfying inputs lose out on the intuitivity of negative edge and the simplicity of modifiers. Hadouken and Shoryuken are both burned into my brain, but so is the labor of trying to burn it into others. No, you don't have to let it go to the middle each time. No, you have to do it faster. No, that's too fast. Just do it in one motion. Fuck it, let's just play Divekick. Even if you're not new, there's really no way of knowing a character's move pool short of either memorizing every character's every move, or frequently stopping to check the command list. Back in Marvel, Dante uses curve wrist for both quarter circle back medium and quarter circle forward medium. That's easy enough to recall even if you play multiple dudes, but Agni and Rudra are stuck on quarter circle back heavy and Shuryu light. I imagine if you actually make the effort to master and main any type of character, it eventually just becomes muscle memory. But if you want to have a pocket or two for friendlies, it quickly becomes a pain internalizing all that information. That's just clueless noobs and worthless hobbyists though. The only people that really matter are the high-level Adonis Grandmasters. And even they aren't unaffected by the imperfections behind motion inputs. This may blow your mind, there are multiple ways to throw a Shoryuken. The traditional motion is just making a Z with a stick, 6-2-3. Now there's also the 3-3 inputs and forward fireball. You may notice the issue there. Interpreting forward fireball as Shoryuken means that no player will be able to inch forwards and throw a fireball move out. Maybe not a big sacrifice for Ryus, but Seth players, for example, need to consciously let the stick recenter if they want to step in and flurry. That means their window of opportunity gets tightened not due to a lack of skill, but by hardware limitations. Again, we're talking about professionals, so part of their job is to know what won't work. But from a designer's perspective, it's a flaw to put a skill ceiling on input speed, even if it's a minor one. You could say there are only 12 buttons and 2 sticks on a GameCube controller. You could say you can't marry a GameCube controller. That would detract from how versatile this tech actually is. Holds and negative edges allow for intuitive controls and even some decent multitasking in the right environment. Just make sure you've got a nice way to cancel out of a charge and a reasonable way to hold the controller. Combination inputs are generally easier to throw out, though they often require the right context to stick in the player's mind. So long as the player knows what's going on in the game world, they'll be able to perform adequately. And motion inputs suck in every way, except for the one that counts. There's an exponential amount of them, and that means delicious, delicious depth. There's a misconception that more complex means more better, which just ain't true. To be real, it doesn't even really mean more deep, but it does mean more video game, which means more tech, which means more strats, which means more playstyles, and no matter what your proclivity is going into a game, winning, creating, learning, that's the kind of development you want to see.